Let's go ahead and get started, everyone, but please feel free to continue dropping your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. My name is Sid Betancourt, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And you're currently joining Tenant Talk Live, where we provide opportunities for residents to connect with NLIHC and with one another to share best practices and learn how to get involved more in influencing federal housing policy and to lead in their communities. Today, I will begin by providing some general NLIHC updates, as I always do, and then I'll begin to introduce our guest who will be speaking on organizing for Housing Choice Voucher holders. And then I'll finish us off just with some closing remarks, but also some updates from our research team. But before I get started with that information, I'll go ahead and give some logistical information. The session is being recorded, as you just noticed when I hit the record button, but we'll be uploading this webinar to our YouTube channel later this week, so you can share that with other folks that might have not been able to attend today. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen. It's usually next to the chat, I believe. And please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat as well. They're always welcome. And I'll be sharing a follow-up email with you all. Probably around Wednesday through Friday. It just depends on when I'm able to get it out, but I'll be going to a conference later this week, so hopefully I'll be able to get it to you all as soon as possible. And I'll try my best to also invite folks from the audience to participate on the call and unmute y'all so you can join in the conversation that we're having. And again, just so that we stay on topic, I just ask you all to make sure that you're joining the conversation with the Housing Choice Voucher holders. So. But everyone's welcome to speak. So now let's begin with some of the policy updates that we have. Things haven't really changed since last week, I would say. The biggest thing is that congressional leaders are working on the FY23 federal budget. And with this budget, Congress has the opportunity to make significant investments in affordable housing, community development, and homelessness programs, including some of NLIHC's top priorities for this bill, which include $32.1 billion for tenant-based rental assistance that would renew all existing contracts and expand housing vouchers to an additional 200,000 households. We've allocated $5.125 billion for the Public Housing Capital Fund and $5.06 billion for the Public Housing Operating Fund. It would give at least $3.6 billion for HUD's homeless assistance programs to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness, and at least $300 million for the competitive tribal housing program targeted to tribes with the greatest needs, and at least $100 million for legal assistance to prevent evictions. And in addition to the budget, we just continue to encourage advocates like yourselves to contact their members of Congress to urge them to retain historic targeted investments in affordable housing and any reconciliation package, including expansions to housing vouchers, preserving public housing, and also funding the National Housing Trust Fund to build and preserve and operate more than 150 units of affordable, accessible homes for the households with the lowest income. Bold federal investments, as we know, in affordable housing are needed to address inflation, and NLIHC actually created like a fact sheet that you can look at that kind of outlines what that would look like if you wanted to share that with your members of Congress, but you can also feel free to share that with other elected officials. And Gabby just dropped the link for that in the chat. And we're also going to be sharing some links in the chat for ways that you can take action. We have letters for both of those action items. So if you're part of an organization and want to sign your organization onto those letters, you can do so at the links that Gabby will drop in the chat. But you can also contact your members of Congress and urge them, one, to make sure that our priorities are in the fiscal year 2023 budget, but also that any reconciliation package has important investments in rental assistance, public housing, and the National Housing Trust Fund. If you all have any questions, you can email Sarah Sadian, our VP of Public Policy and Field, which we will include her email in the chat as well. Lots of information in the chat today, but I'm going to try to get through all of this as quickly as I can. And I have like an update from Tenant Talk Live that we held last year on the moving to work demonstration, where we kind of provided feedback on asset and credit building. So HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, they posted a notice last week inviting public housing authorities to apply for a new moving to work cohort that will experiment with policies and practices that will help residents build financial assets and or build credit. And so for the purpose of this new cohort, asset building is going to be defined as activities that encourage the growth of assisted resident savings account and or aim to build credit for assisted households. The Office of Public and Indian Housing is offering 3 different options for folks to build their assets, and it's going to include an opt-out savings account option, a credit building option, and then an option that the PHAs can design themselves. If you have any questions about that or how your PHA can get involved in this demonstration project, I highly encourage you all to reach out to our moving to work expert at NLIHC, Ed Gramlich, and Gabby just dropped that information in the chat. So I'll now really quickly just move on to introducing some of our panelists today. I'll introduce Bridgett Simmons at the National Housing Law Project and Darryn Mumphery at the Poverty and Race Research Action Council. And they'll be talking a little bit more about organizing for housing choice voucher holders and their proposal to expand and empower tenants. So I'll let you both take it away from here, Bridgett and Darryn.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here today. My name is Darryn Mumphery, and I'm a Law and Policy Associate at the Poverty and Race Research Action Council. And I work mainly in education and housing. Most of my housing work is centered around the Housing Choice Voucher program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bridgett Simmons, a staff attorney with the National Housing Law Project. NHLP, as context for some folks who are unaware about, not familiar with NHLP, we provide technical assistance as well as policy support at the federal, state, and local level on issues impacting marginalized communities' access to decent, safe, and sanitary housing. And a part of that policy support work includes our partnership with PRAC on a proposal for organizing in the Housing Choice Voucher program. And so before we talk about the proposal, I just wanted to provide some context about organizing in the federal housing programs. So as you remember, or as some of you may know, there are 3 federal agencies that administer federal housing programs. So first you have HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which administers the programs, voucher programs, public housing, some of the more popular housing programs. You have the Department of Agriculture, the USDA, which administers the rural development programs. And then of course you have the Department of Treasury that administers the LIHC program. And so in the federal housing program programs, essentially there are organizing rights that have been codified in 2 of these federal programs. That's public housing as well as the project-based rental assistance programs. So in those programs, HUD describes the rights that tenants have by the nature of their participation in the program to be protected against retaliation due to their participation in organizing activities. And so today we're just here to describe our proposal for the Housing Choice Voucher program. So actually taking a pause. So HUD has, in public housing as well as the project-based rental assistance program includes a right to organize, so organizing regulations and protections for tenants. In the other federal programs, there are not rules or regulations or protections for tenants to organize in those programs. And so while those programs don't have an explicit right to organize or explicit rules around organizing, we do understand that through our constitutional protections, folks have a right to be in association with people. You have a freedom of speech, right? So you always have a right to organize, but having an explicit right to organize in the regulations allow for tenants as well as organizers to point to statutory or text in the law that says, I have a right to do this at this location, right? And so with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Darryn to discuss why organizing is important.
So as she said, although tenants have the right to organize within their constitutional rights, it is important that they have that codified in regulation, specifically for these programs. So the right to organize is really the cornerstone of all other advocacy, right? Tenants need to feel like they can engage in practices that are going to give them a say in the conditions of their housing. And they deserve to be able to support themselves and one another through those programs, because community and collaboration are really important in advocacy, especially when it comes to housing. When tenants have an explicit and protected right to organize, they're able to more confidently work to prevent or disrupt discriminatory and exploitative practices, maybe by landlords or developers. They can advocate for themselves politically, helping politicians implement policies that are more housing friendly, federal program friendly, renter friendly. They can improve their own program experiences while they are also impacting the future of these federal housing programs. And they can appeal to HUD directly as a unit about program changes or innovations. So an explicitly articulated right to organize is important because it is the most efficient and effective way to bring about some advocacy that can make some real concrete changes and help people in these programs get all they can from federal housing help. And Bridgett is going to share the proposal and talk about that a little bit more now.
Yeah, so if we could just share the proposal or broadcast it so folks can see it. Thanks so much. So here, Sydney is sharing out the proposal that Darryn and I have been referencing. A link to this proposal was shared in the announcement for today's call. So here, so NHLP and PRAC, as Darryn indicated, this proposal is a joint venture, right? And this is based off of conversations that NHLP and PRAC has had with residents who are in groups that are organizing voucher families, with organizers who have experience with organizing voucher families, because we understand that you all have lived experiences, right? And great knowledge can be pulled from your lived experiences. And so we want those lived experiences, those best practices, the lessons learned to be incorporated into this proposal. So while this is drafted, I always tell folks that this document is a living document. So that means it's not static. We're always open to suggestions and your thoughts. So taking another step back, the reason why this proposal was drafted was because of the recognition that the Housing Choice Voucher program doesn't have this explicit right. And it is important that an explicit right is codified in the program, but also that tenant organizing is funded, right? So organizing doesn't happen for free. It requires financial resources. And so in this proposal, we also ask for HUD to fund that organizing activities as well as capacity building activities. And so we're just really here today to share this proposal with you all in hopes of receiving feedback from you all. So if you haven't had a chance to review it today, that's totally fine. I believe Darryn and my email was shared in the chat. I'll also post it again for your reference. And so we're just looking to hear from you all, to hear about your experiences in organizing in the voucher program, and wanting to work in coalition with those that are interested in expanding the right to organize throughout the federal housing programs, and wanting to really build a coalition and a campaign around getting organizing done or codified for not just for the Housing Choice Voucher program, but hopefully for all all federal housing programs in the future. So with that, I think we can pause, take questions, comments. So the link for public housing is, the public housing regulations is the second link that I sent or put in the chat.
And yeah, I did add my email to the chat as well. If anyone didn't see it, I can definitely add it again. I think both of our contact information should be in there. And the funding piece is extremely important because it's not at all unheard of. And organizing doesn't happen for free, especially when you are organizing the people who are living on the voucher, people who are living in public housing. They need to be supported in those efforts because they should not have to use their own money to organize just for living. So please engage with the proposal, read more about this proposal, Representative Levin's bill, the Tenant Empowerment Act, and look into setting up tenant organizations in your locality, because there aren't a whole lot of them, but they can be extremely impactful and effective at making the experience within federal housing programs just go a little bit better than tenants having to navigate everything independently.
I did see a question from Amanda, and I'm sorry if I skipped some questions. I'll go back to them too if I can see them, but I do see somebody from New York City saying, for example, when ERA closed due to supposedly no more funding, they claim they got more funding, but there isn't a timeline when it'll open back up. What other options are there? I'm assuming in terms of organizing, but if you want to raise your hand, Amanda, you can too. It's very challenging to find the solutions to these issues. Do you all have any feedback for Amanda? And then I'll take a question from the audience who has their hand raised.
I'm sorry, could you say Amanda's question one more time?
Of course. For example, the ERA program that closed in New York City, they claim they got no more funding, but there isn't a timeline of when it'll open back up. Are there any other options out there? It's really challenging to find a solution to this issue.
Okay.
So a solution to the issue. So I would say in response to the question is so ERA is administered by a local entity, right? So for folks that are looking to engage with local program, actually any program, right? You have to know who is administering the program and how the program is structured. But in terms of organizing and advice about organizing, it's important to determine who can be supportive to the issue, right? Are there other tenants, other families that are experiencing issues with accessing the program, ERA, Housing Choice Voucher, public housing? So just using Housing Choice Voucher program as an example, the Public Housing Authority, which is a local agency, administers the Housing Choice Voucher program. That PHA has a lot of discretion in how the program is structured, right? So they create PHA plans, one primarily being an administrative plan. So through that process, they're supposed to engage tenants. And because currently the Housing Choice Voucher program doesn't explicitly have a tenant organizing component, right? That engagement varies in how it looks, right? But if tenants are organized and are aware of their ability to participate in that process, then they are able to develop collective power, right? So they can identify an issue with access, and then through their lived experience, also identify solutions, right? And in particular about tenant organizing, one, there tends to be a bit of protection in organizing in a group, right? It's harder to single someone out if a collective is doing the organizing, right? And then in the second piece, organizing is a way to build collective power, in particular in communities that have been traditionally marginalized, right? It's a way to give folks a say, right? And then the third piece is it's a groundswell. It really demonstrates, like, within the community, this is what we want, right? It's a physical demonstration of the want. And so the other piece I'll just add, it's important that tenants are a part of this organizing group to have an opportunity to organize, but it's also really important that stakeholders are supportive of those tenant groups in helping and building their capacity. So the knowledge about how programs are structured, but then also how the process of doing advocacy works.
Yeah, so for instance, we put together a group of organizations who had tenant advisory councils, and these were run by Housing Choice Voucher tenants. And they had all shared experiences with us about the program administration, and a lot of stuff they were saying was stuff that the PHA could impact. So they didn't know that initially coming in. The PHA determined so much about program administration. So what we drew from that meeting was, okay, we need to figure out how to connect these councils to PHAs and figure out how to make it so that stakeholders from the PHA are in the room with these people they're servicing, understanding what's going wrong at the local level in the program, or what is holding up the processes at the local level, so that people can understand at the PHA, these are the changes that need to be made. This is how the administrative plan needs to be amended. This is what we need to do to make our program administration better. So having stakeholders from all parties involved, that means from HUD to the PHA to program recipients, is extremely important. And organizing in that manner with everyone in the room deferring to the tenants with experience, I have personally seen can be a lot more progressive. I feel like there a lot more change that is actually beneficial to people on the program can be made quicker when tenants are listening to. So that's another reason organizing protections are so important, because a lot of times you might be a tenant and not feel like you have the autonomy to organize, or you don't have the freedom to engage in those types of activities.
If we have time, I do want to bring in somebody from the attendees room, if that's okay. We'll bring in Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown, I think you should be able to talk now.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Good evening, everyone. I think this is a very, very, very important topic, because Section 8 voucher holders have been treated like stepchildren, or orphans, if you will. And my concern is that PHAs receive an administrative fee from HUD to manage the vouchers, the Section 8 vouchers. And I feel that from that administrative fee, there should be funds set aside so that Section 8 voucher holders can participate in training, such as with the public housing residents. Public housing residents can get educational training, different types of training, because there's $12 that's set aside, for each unit in the respective developments. And this is used for training of public housing residents. I think this needs to be included for Section 8. Also, the public housing authorities are required to submit an annual plan, a 5-year plan, and an administrative plan to HUD. And they need input from the residents. And this is a vehicle that Section 8 voucher holders can ask the public housing authorities that they be part of that panel, whether it's through a resident advisory board. Here in New York, we have a citywide council of presidents that consist of public housing leadership. And then we have Section 8 delegates. The Section 8 portfolio in New York is 235,000 voucher holders. And on this resident advisory board, there's just one Section 8 person, that's me. We used to have two, but he expired last year. So these are the demands that voucher holders must make to the leadership at their housing authorities, that they want to be included in the resident council. So when the PHAs reach out to the residents for input, they are sitting at the table. They are part of the process. And also insist that reach out to your legislators and insist that monies be included for training for Section 8 voucher holders. Now, I, in my previous role as president of my tenant association, Section 8, I had organized the building, and I was able to take our landlord to housing court on 3 different occasions, and we prevailed. And more and more Section 8 folks are beginning to organize because they realize that this is a vehicle to cure the problems in their respective buildings. So that's what I wanted to share. And I want very much to reach out with the panel to talk about how we strengthen certain things and how we move forward. I remember Catherine Bishop from the National Housing Project, and I was one of the 75 selected under the Donovan administration to work on RAD, which was PBR and all the various names. It ended up being RAD. And I was the person that wrote, my segment was to write tenant protections for the RAD residents. And as of today, they're still using those protections in place, but I'd like for it to expand to all Section 8 voucher holders. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown, for that clarification. So voucher families can participate on the resident advisory board, as Mrs. Brown indicated, right? So the RAB, for those who are unfamiliar with that concept, it is the organization of tenants who the PHA, by regulation, the regulation requires the PHA to engage the RAB as they amend their plans that Mrs. Brown indicated that they have to submit to HUD, right? And so the RAB is supposed to be the face, the voice of the tenants that are assisted through the PHA's programs. So in the public housing, they have this thing called a resident council. Those resident councils, they represent either a particular property or a jurisdiction wide of public housing residents, right? And so their advocacy focuses on the entire public housing program. So the services provided through public housing, other utility allowances, just organizing on the administration of the program locally. Right now, the Housing Choice Voucher regulations don't include a protection for tenants to create organizing groups that represent voucher families in the same way. So like organizations that represent tenants in regards to the administration of the voucher program locally. And so that's what this proposal hopes to get at. And so I'm putting in the chat our emails once again, so feel free to email us and we can schedule a time to chat to get more specific feedback about the proposal. Once again, would love to hear from you all about your lived experiences and best practices. And thanks once again to the coalition for providing this opportunity for us to chat with you all.
And Sid, I can address, if we have time at the end, the question I think Sharon or someone had, and then the retaliation stuff. I'm happy to just go over that very quickly at the end. I know we have Ben still needs to speak.
Of course. I'll give the floor to Ben Gerstein right now, who's a legislative aide with Representative Andy Levin. And I see that there's still a lot of questions coming in, and feel free to ask them, folks. I'll ask the panelists that are here, if you think that you can type it out, please feel free to type it out in the chat or in the Q&A. And if not, we'll follow up afterwards with any questions that we don't get to, just because I know that there's a lot of good discussion happening in the chat, and I don't want to dismiss anything that you all are saying, because this is a really important conversation. But with that being said, I'll hand it over to Ben.
Hi, everyone. Well, first, thank you so much to NLIHC for having me, and thank you so much to Bridgett and Darryn for their presentation, and thanks so much to everyone for being here to partake in this conversation. My name's Ben Gerstein. I work for Congressman Andy Levin, who represents parts of Macomb and Oakland County in Michigan, which are two counties just north of the city of Detroit. I am a legislative correspondent, legislative aide to him, and I handle housing policy along with civil rights and reproductive rights issues. And wanted to be here today to talk a little bit about how we're taking some of the recommendations that have been discussed and trying to transform them into legislation. And so, again, want to reiterate how helpful Darryn and Bridgett have been and their organizations in support of this effort, which we are sort of just beginning, but wanted to be here to share a bit about where we're at in this process, and also because good legislation is most informed by the folks who are directly impacted by it. And so what we're working to do under sort of the guise of what's called this Tenants' Right to Organize Act, which is really a follow-up on more organizing specific legislation that it's a follow-up to the Tenant Empowerment Act, which was introduced this year. And the objective of it is to sort of increase organizing or create organizing protections for these two programs, LIHTC and Housing Choice Vouchers. And then also, as Bridgett, I think, alluded to in her presentation, the importance of creating a mechanism to fund these organizations, because we know how hard it is for groups to find this funding. And we know that there's funding out there through Section 514 that hasn't been dispersed yet. And then also within the creation of these programs, wanted to create or instruct HUD to set up a process for folks to make reports and to receive some form of accountability. And so we're hoping that we can sort of begin the process of creating these accountability mechanisms within HUD for these two programs, and seeing that there is more oversight of the way HUD enforces its right to organize and also funds those organizations. And so one of the main things that I'm excited to be in conversation with you all about, and what's been alluded to previously, is the kinds of organizing protections that both individuals and organizations are going to need for a program like Housing Choice Vouchers, which are tenant-based and not project-based. And so it's obviously a very different landscape. I'm interested in learning about what kind of activities and what kinds of protections are specifically needed. And then also broadly in thinking about what kinds of protections what kinds of processes would be needed to make sure owners and PHAs are held accountable to these protections through HUD. And so that's sort of a high level explanation of what we're starting to work on and go back and forth with, but I'm really excited to be here and to learn a bit from you and to have you all participate in the drafting of this legislation. And I've noticed it in the chat and just want to emphasize too, and we haven't really touched on this today because I know the focus is housing choice vouchers, but certainly interested in being in conversation with folks who have experience in LIHTC dominated properties or organizing LIHTC tenants. We know that, and we're really eager to find ways to increase protections for tenants in those programs. And we know those have been missing and are really eager to see what we can do at a congressional level. And so with that, happy to answer questions and make myself available to you all, and I'll turn it back over to Sid.
Of course, thanks so much, Ben. I'm gonna bring in somebody else from the crowd. Marie, I think it's Mariah, I'm so sorry if I butchered that, but you're okay to unmute yourself now if you'd like to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for this panel. I'd just like to address the issue that the market rate rents are way higher than these voucher amounts. And so I'm real happy that we're having this conversation and this proposal about the ways we can organize and tighten that up and get some money for it. But it's a moot point in terms of the viability of these vouchers on the open market. And so I would like to see us focus on organizing around getting these voucher amounts increased, and so that people can stay in their housing. Like, for example, some time ago, my rent got raised like $300 a month. And so I got priced out of my voucher amount and had to move somewhere that was totally inappropriate. And this is happening all over. The voucher residents are talking about they can't find anywhere to use them. So what good is it to talk about organizing when you can't even get to first base with utilization? So what is the government doing about, and representatives doing about bringing these voucher rents up high enough to where, and you can stay at least 5 years in one place before landlords raise your rent up to where you've got to move again, because you're very unstable on these vouchers. The other thing is that some of these nonprofit landlords, they are targeting voucher holders and raising their rents up faster and in like 7 times the amount than other residents who are non-voucher holders. And I had to take my current landlord to task in one, but it was really very, very stressful. And I'm a senior, and I was sick at the time. And so, this is an incredible amount of pressure that's put on voucher holders. So, I think these major issues have to be addressed, because if we end up unhoused, evicted, rent evicted, it doesn't matter if we can organize or not. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing again. And I did want to bring someone else off of mute. I don't see your hand up, Linda Seltzer, but I know you had a question, and I'm going to invite you to speak right now just so that you can ask that question out loud, because I lost it. Admittedly, I lost it within the chat, but I do really want to make sure that we address it since you asked it a while back. Linda, you should be able to unmute now. Let me know if you're able to see it. No? Okay. Oh, she has no mic. Okay. Cool. Then I'll go back and look for that question, Linda, but I did see another question come up a little bit earlier as well, and I'll invite Darryn and Bridgett to come back and speak on this as well. But there was a question that came up talking about the geography, and it came from Shannon that talked about knowing with project-based public housing that have tenant organizations, since Housing Choice Vouchers users are more scattered throughout the country, how does that change the organizing that they would do?
Yeah, so I think, currently, because HUD has no regulations about how the voucher organizing should look like, it's really contingent, it's really up to the, the families to decide what the organizing structure will look like. So Darryn can speak more to what that looks like, or the groups that they've worked with.
So we at PRAC work with a lot of mobility organizations, specifically in Chicago, Dallas, and Baltimore. And those organizations work kind of with the PHAs to get information on people with vouchers in the area, and they provide services to voucher holders. So a lot of the support that the PHA doesn't really have the bandwidth to provide. They give, classes about how to engage in the mobility process. They help with portability, and they kind of help with educating them about like paths to home ownership and stuff like that. But what they also do is get the voucher holders in a locality together and give them a platform to talk about the issues they're experiencing and think about things they want to do differently, think about what they want to convey to the PHA that needs to change about the processes. So everyone doesn't have the luxury of having a mobility organization in their area, but what can be done is the use of technology, social media, and even sometimes just if you find one person and you all find another person and another person, using every single mode of technology that you have to connect with people, but starting with the PHA because they will have that information. They might not want to give it to you, but if you work with the PHA and figure out how you can implement some sort of relationship with them where they're willing to help you guys set up an organization or connect you with organizers and volunteers in the area who will set up the organization, because usually that's what they're more willing to do, is connect you with a community organization that's going to do that work. That can definitely give you a start. And that research can be done on Google, on Facebook, finding those organizations that organize housing choice voucher tenants. There are national organizations that give information about it. I think there is like 1 or 2 national organizations that are tenant run, just run by housing choice voucher tenants and not affiliated with an organization that is not staffed by voucher holders. But there are a lot of workarounds for housing choice voucher organizing because it's such a different setup. People are everywhere and people have to move a lot. So we all know that within the voucher program, people can decide, well, I don't want to rent to a voucher holder anymore. When this lease ends, you guys have to leave. So that creates a lot of like fluidity. So it is very difficult. I won't say it isn't, but it can happen. I think Facebook is a good place to start, but also just researching local organizations who are willing to engage in voucher holder organizing, because that can spur out to something bigger. You guys can put together a program and get information about voucher holders in the area and just come together as a unit and establish something of your own.
And then, so not exactly answer to the question, but I think related, is resources. So if you are someone who wants to start a resident organization for voucher participants in your community, you may not know, like, where do you start, right? So HUD does have some resources for public housing residents about organizing. And so I would just say there are numerous resources that are available about how to start a tenant organization. If folks are interested in accessing those materials, you can feel free to reach out to myself or to Darryn. And so folks who maybe are feeling a little daunted by the task of starting a resident organization should also know that there are resources that are available to provide them support. I would also mention that right now there is a Safe and Healthy Homes Vista program where there are paid organizers in communities, and their task is to support tenants in their organizing, and that includes supporting tenants in developing resident organizations. And so if folks are interested in learning more about where safe and healthy home vistas are located, you can feel free to reach out to me or email me, and I can share that list.
Thank you so much to both Bridgett and Darryn for answering that question. I'm gonna try to bring somebody else off of mute. I don't remember what order everybody came in because there was a lot of raising and lowering of hands. So I'm gonna go with Robin for right now. And I think I put Latrice in here as well. I'll let Robin go first and then Latrice go afterwards.
Hey guys, thank you for having this tonight. I am a senior as well, and I'm in a project-based voucher. I'm living in a suburb of Chicago, and I'm walking in my apartment right now, so I probably should get inside and not talk so freely out in the hall. What I'm finding with the low income tax credit, there seems to be no regulation and no enforcement. There's no hen guarding the hen house, I guess is the phrase. And I hope that that changes. I have been in a very volatile situation with constant threat of eviction. I asked for reasonable accommodations that were not honored. And because I've asked for too many, I guess to my building, I became a pain to them. And it is easier to keep threatening and harassing me for, it's been a year and 8 months I've lived in my unit. Between the violations, the 10-day notices, the 230-day notices, and just the constant of not being able to get help. No one wants to form a tenant organization in my building because they're all afraid that they're going to be retaliated, as I have been. So people see what's going on, and there's other issues with some of the disabled people in here, but everybody is so afraid of homelessness that they will put up with the mistreatment and the nonsense that does go on. And I wish I could do more to change that. Do you have any insight to how I can be better part of the change with all of this?
So maybe, so you indicated that you are finding difficulty in finding residents at the property in which you live who are interested in organizing or creating this tenant organization.
Correct.
So one option or thought is to having individual conversations, doing door knocking. Some of those efforts attract folks who maybe are willing to risk the potential of retaliation, right? So like when folks are generally starting up their resident groups, organizers encourage door knocking, leafing, gauging interests of neighbors and other community members about investing time and energy in creating this group. And so even though your group may start off with 1 or 2 or 4 folks, start off small, if your organization can build momentum, it's you can build membership, right? The other piece I would say is, in addition to creating this tenant organization, it's also important to be connected with local legal aid and seeing if they can provide not only legal support, so representing the resident organization, and also providing like training, right? So what does this program, how does it look? How can you do advocacy on this particular issue? So I think someone earlier raised an issue about payment standards, right? So payment standards is a really big issue in how families can access housing using their voucher, right? So it's a really big issue that tenant organizations can have a great deal of influence in and around. And so legal organizations as well as organizing organizations can really be supportive to tenants in building their capacity, but then also helping them and supporting them in asserting their rights. So speaking to owners about these are the regulations, these are the protections. And then if the owner is unresponsive, taking additional action. So whether that's sending an administrative complaint to the agency that administers the program, or more another enforcement strategy. So I encourage folks to, talk to your neighbors, do the door knocking, but then also tap into the local resources. And then something that we haven't really mentioned, but I think is important, is that you should also look to state and local law. So some states do have a right to organize and have organizing protections that folks should seek to leverage. And then I'll just say, folks have called out, and I just want to say here to that, is having the right and being able to enforce and use the right are very two different things, right? And so a lot of this, in addition to having the right, we also need to push on these agencies that administer these programs to be present in enforcement and oversight, right? And so that's part of our Housing Choice Voucher organizing proposal, which we would love to hear folks' feedback on. It's also part of the members' bill, right? And so it's really important that we hear from you all about the ways in which owners, PHAs try to skirt around various rules, or the tactics that they use to try to retaliate or even try to intimidate tenants, right? So that's how we learn from your lived experiences.
Yeah, I just want to let you all know, you are heard. We know we are listening, that it is not easy to exercise the right to organize. It's not nearly as easy as saying it, that's for sure, because, we can say that you all have this right. We can say that we're advocating for you to get it codified, even if it's on the books. That does not mean landlords are going to comply. It does not mean that even if they don't comply, the oversight for your complaints are going to deliver the results you all want. So just please know that you all are heard, and it is going to be an uphill battle. It is going to be extremely difficult. And I really am, very happy that all of you are engaged in a environment like this, because this is coalition building, and this is what it takes to fight back against the lack of oversight, the lack of an explicitly codified right to organize. Everybody having these conversations in the chat, meeting each other, connecting with each other, sharing stories, that's all going to make a difference, because people have resources that other people don't have. And this is the type of environment where you guys can meet people and get connected to do things that you couldn't do before, because you have a number or an email or an organization name that you didn't have before. So it is by no means easy. And I hope it doesn't sound like we're making it easier than it is, because we know firsthand, we listen to you all, we listen to other people. I mean, there are landlord discrimination laws on the books in areas around where I'm at, and landlords will flat out discriminate against the voucher and say you can't live here. So they break the law all the time. And we know that. So we just want you guys to stay uplifted and keep doing things like this, keep coming to these types of events and talking to each other.
Just to quickly add to those two responses as well, and again, reiterate how powerful it is to be here and to hear these experiences. I also know that this work is sort of one piece of the effort to sort of reframe public housing programs as being focused on benefiting and caring and prioritizing the well-being of tenants. And so we appreciate, I specifically appreciate hearing the different ways beyond organizing that we ought to be centering tenants in the experience and in the design of the programs. And this is also not to say that the programs that have right to organize protections, those are being enforced perfectly as well. And so I'm excited to sort of begin engaging in this broader effort to see not only how we can strengthen and create protections where they don't exist, but broadly make sure in the places where the protections do exist, they're being enforced and there is oversight that holds the folks who need to be enforcing those protections to account.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to Bridget, to Darryn, and to Ben for joining us for this discussion today. I know we're running a little bit low on time. We only got 2 minutes left, but I did just want to echo the thoughts shared by Bridget, knowing that it is really frustrating knowing that a lot of the times you have to, oh, I'm so sorry, Robin. I'm so cute. I think it's like a puppy in the background, but I'm gonna have you come out really fast. But I do really just want to say that for those of you in the chat that are just sharing your thoughts and holding us accountable in the work that we do, because, you know, engaging with folks and sharing your stories is definitely going to have to be a lot more than just sharing those stories for our benefit and making sure that we're making policy that is actually going to be benefiting the people that we're saying that we're serving. So I appreciate y'all bringing that up. And to everybody that's like fighting the fight and sharing your stories in the comments, I really do appreciate it. And really briefly, before I close out, I just want to give the floor to Emma Foley, one of our research analysts, who will be sharing some of the work that she's doing with Out of Reach.
Hi there, I'll be so quick, but we are working on our annual report Out of Reach, which estimates the hourly wage a renter needs to make to afford a modest apartment. And as a part of the report this year, we're discussing the widespread rent increases that have affected many renters across the country. We're hoping to learn more about the impacts of these rent increases from affected tenants through brief 30-minute interviews, and are providing stipends to compensate folks for their time and knowledge. So if you or someone you know has experienced a rent increase in the last year, please feel free to email me and we can set up a time to talk. And I will also say that we're only able to do around 5 to 7 interviews at this time. So if I receive more responses than that, I apologize in advance. But I really appreciate hearing from you all. And again, if you've experienced a rent increase in the last year and would like to share your story for Out of Reach, my email's in the chat and it is efoley@nlihc.org.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you again to all of our speakers who joined us. If you all have any questions, again, always feel free to email me. We'll share that in the chat. And just a reminder to join our Facebook page as well, so you continue these conversations on there. And I hope everyone has a good night. Thanks again for joining us.